Stop scrolling! Collectors, coin dealers, and rare coin lovers around the world, this is for you. Some old US one-dime coins look small, but their value can be shocking. We're talking about dimes that can sell for thousands, even six figures. If you own old coins, you might already be holding a hidden treasure. Watch till the end, because these are the most valuable US old one-dime coins ever. Tiny silver coin once bought a meal, now it can buy a mansion. Discover the forgotten fortune behind the rare 1916 one dime that changed American coin history forever. The year is 1916, and America is standing on the edge of great transformation as the country continues to grow and evolve. So too does its currency, and the coins minted in this era become powerful symbols of national identity and pride. Among them is the 1916 one dime, a coin that appears small and unassuming at first glance, but carries with it a story of incredible value, historical significance, artistic excellence, and national change. To truly understand the value and legacy of the 1916 one dime, we must go back to the early 20th century, a time when the United States was emerging as a global power, when President Woodrow Wilson was leading the nation, and when the economy, industry, and infrastructure were booming. The United States Mint was under pressure to modernize coinage and introduce designs that reflected the new century. The designs of Charles Barber, the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint, had dominated the coinage of the late 1800s and early 1900s, including the Barber dime, but by 1915 there was a clear desire for something fresh, something that symbolized liberty, not just in name, but in imagery. This is where Adolf A. Weinman enters the picture, a gifted sculptor and engraver. He was chosen to design the new dime in a contest sponsored by the Commission of Fine Arts. Weinman delivered a masterpiece that would soon become known as the Mercury dime, although the coin officially represented liberty, wearing a winged cap to symbolize freedom of thought. The resemblance to the Roman god Mercury gave the coin its popular nickname in 1916. The first year of the Mercury dime production, the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints began striking these coins. Each mint left its mark in a subtle way with a tiny letter representing its city: P for Philadelphia, D for Denver, and S for San Francisco. But it was the 1916 D Mercury dime that would rise above all others to become one of the most valuable and sought-after coins in American numismatic history. The Denver Mint produced only 26,000 of these dimes, a shockingly low number, in contrast. The Philadelphia Mint struck more than 22 million, and the San Francisco Mint produced over 10 million. This rarity made the 1916 D dime an instant target for collectors, and its value soared as demand outpaced supply. Even in circulated condition, a genuine 1916 D Mercury dime can be worth thousands of dollars, and in uncirculated mint state, it can reach into the tens or even hundreds of thousands. Collectors often search for that tiny D mint mark on the reverse of the coin just to verify its origin and authenticity. Many fakes exist, making authentication crucial, but what makes this coin so desirable goes beyond rarity. It is also about the artistry and symbolism. The obverse of the coin features liberty in a winged cap, representing freedom of thought, and the reverse shows a fasces and olive branch, symbols of unity, strength, and peace. Powerful messages in an era just before the United States would enter World War I. The 1916 one dime, especially the Denver Mint version, marks a pivotal shift in the philosophy of American coin design. It shows a move toward symbolism, toward beauty, and toward a message of democratic ideals and strength through unity. This coin was not just for spending, it was meant to represent American values every time it passed. From hand to hand, it reminded citizens of what they stood for and what the country aimed to become. During the early years of the Mercury dime, the coin circulated widely and was used for daily transactions. It bought food, paid for bus rides, helped with savings, and was even used in vending machines over time as the design became more familiar, and as collectors realized the rarity of the 1916 D version. It was pulled from circulation and stored away in collections, museums, and safes around the world. The historical context of the 1916 dime is also vital. This was a period of global upheaval with World War I raging in Europe and tensions rising in the United States as well. It was a time of suffragette marches, labor strikes, and rapid industrialization. The dime minted in 1916 would pass through the hands of Americans, witnessing the First War, the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and the Second World War. Its legacy continued through all those moments as a silent witness to the American story. Through the decades, the Mercury dime series ran from 1916 to 1945, when it was replaced by the Roosevelt dime following the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, yet none of the subsequent designs would carry quite the same mystique and collector demand as the 1916 D dime, too. This day, coin dealers, auction houses, and collectors all seek out this legendary coin. The story of its low mintage, the artistry of Weinman, the symbolism of its design, and the passion it ignites in collectors make it one of the most iconic dimes ever struck in United States history, and it is not just the 1916 D that matters. Even the 1916 S and 1916 P have historical and numismatic value. Especially in high grades, when preserved carefully, these coins tell their own. Unique stories of minting distribution and use in different parts of the country, advanced collectors know that full band details on the reverse of the Mercury dime can dramatically increase value. The full bands are horizontal lines on the fasces and show how well the coin was struck. This detail adds a layer of grading complexity and value enhancement that makes hunting for the perfect 1916 dime all the more thrilling. The Mercury dime also inspired future coin designers and left a legacy of artistic excellence within the U.S. Mint. The impact of Weinman design is felt even today, as his initials AW can be seen on modern coins like the American Silver Eagle. The 1916 one dime serves as a perfect example of how a small object can carry immense history value and emotion. It represents craftsmanship, rarity, symbolism, patriotism, and the journey of a growing nation. It is a treasure of silver and a symbol of identity from the Denver Mint. To collectors' hands, from history books to auction catalogs, this coin lives on. If you ever come across an old dime, check the date and flip it over to look for that tiny D, because you may just be holding one of the most legendary and valuable coins in American history. And if that coin happens to be uncirculated with full bands and confirmed authenticity, you are not just looking at 10 cents. You are looking at a piece of national heritage worth more than gold in the world of coin collecting. The 1916 one dime is not just a coin, it is a legend. And this legend continues to inspire collectors, historians, and investors from generation to generation. In the world of American numismatics, there are coins that are instantly recognizable for their designs, their symbolism, and their connection to the everyday lives of millions of people. And among those coins is the Roosevelt dime, which in 1971 entered yet another chapter in its long journey of circulation, minting, and collecting. When you hold a 1971 dime, you are not just holding 10 cents of American currency. You are holding a piece of United States history that reflects the economic conditions, the political climate, the minting technology, and the cultural values of its time. The 1971 dime carries on the design that was first introduced in 1946, shortly after the death of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II had made him one of the most influential presidents in American history. The dime became the coin chosen to honor him, not only because of his legacy as a leader, but also because of his association with the March of Dimes campaign, which sought to eradicate polio, a disease that Roosevelt himself struggled with throughout much of his life. The coin was designed by John R. Sinek, the chief engraver of the United States Mint, and the obverse features the left-facing profile portrait of Roosevelt, while the reverse presents a torch symbolizing liberty flanked by an olive branch for peace and an oak branch for strength. This simple yet meaningful design carried forward into 1971 with no major changes, but every year of production has its own story, and the 1971 dime is no exception. To understand the 1971 Roosevelt dime, one must consider the broader historical and economic background of the United States during that year. The early 1970s were a time of significant change in the nation. The Vietnam War was ongoing. President Richard Nixon was in office, and in August 1971, Nixon shocked the world by taking the United States off the gold standard, ending the direct convertibility of the dollar to gold. This was known as the Nixon shock, and it set in motion a new era of American and global finance. While the dime itself was not directly tied to gold, its production and circulation existed within this larger framework of economic upheaval. Inflationary pressures, and shifting monetary policies. In 1971, the dime was struck at three different mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with the Philadelphia Mint producing coins without a mint mark, the Denver Mint producing coins with the D mint mark, and the San Francisco Mint producing proof coins with the S mint mark. It is important to remember that the composition of the dime had already changed a few years earlier in 1965 as a result of the Coinage Act, which eliminated silver from the dime and quarter, replacing it with a clad composition consisting of an outer layer of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core. This was done because the rising price of silver had made it impractical for the government to continue minting circulating silver dimes. By 1971, collectors were already well aware that silver dimes from 1964 and earlier had intrinsic value above their face value due to their precious metal content. But the clad dimes, such as those produced in 1971, carried no intrinsic silver and instead represented a shift to a more modern, cost-effective coinage system. Still, the 1971 dime holds significance for collectors because of its variety's errors and its role in the continuity of American coinage. For example, minting technology in the early 1970s was not as advanced as it is today, and quality control issues sometimes resulted in error coins. These can include off-center strikes, double strikes, die cracks, filled dies, and weak strikes. In some cases, proof coins from the San Francisco Mint show variations in cameo contrast or even frosting levels, which can affect their desirability among collectors. Another point of interest lies in the fact that while the clad composition was intended to produce durable, long-lasting coins, the actual wear on circulation pieces from the early 1970s demonstrates how the nickel cladding could lose luster over time. Collectors often find that coins from 1971 in higher grades with full bands on the torch of the reverse are much scarcer than circulated examples. The full bands designation refers to the horizontal bands on the torch being fully struck and separated, which is a hallmark of quality, striking, and often commands a premium in the marketplace. When we examine the mintage numbers, we find that the Philadelphia Mint struck over 316 million dimes in 1971, the Denver Mint produced over 754 million, and the San Francisco Mint issued over 3 million proof coins. These figures reveal that the 1971 dime was produced in massive quantities, ensuring its circulation across the nation and embedding it deeply into the pockets, purses, and cash registers of everyday Americans. Yet, despite the huge mintages, truly high-grade examples remain a challenge for collectors because coins struck for circulation were not intended to be preserved in pristine condition. They were handled, they were spent, and they were exposed to the wear and tear of commerce, making mint-state examples above grade MS-66 or higher relatively rare and therefore collectible. The San Francisco proof issues stand out for their mirror-like surfaces and sharp details, but they too can vary in quality, with some coins showing hazing or spotting, while others achieve deep cameo designations, which are highly prized. When evaluating the 1971 dime in terms of value, one must consider condition rarity and collector demand. A worn circulation dime from 1971 is typically worth only its face value of 10 cents. However, coins in uncirculated grades can command higher premiums, with the most exceptional examples certified by grading services, selling for much more proof coins, especially those with deep cameo designations are also valued highly by collectors beyond the physical attributes of the coin. The 1971 dime is also a reflection of American life in that era. It was the coin handed to children for candy at the corner store. It was the dime dropped into a payphone to make an urgent call. It was the coin used in vending machines, jukeboxes, and laundromats. It was a symbol of everyday commerce at a time when 10 cents could still buy something meaningful in American society. The Roosevelt dime was and remains the smallest denomination coin in terms of physical size still in circulation today, yet it has carried enormous symbolic weight over the decades, and the 1971 issue is part of that continuum. It reminds us of the transition from silver to clad coinage. It reflects the economic turbulence of the early 1970s. It offers numismatists opportunities for study in varieties, grades, and minting quality, and it connects us to the legacy of Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose visage still graces the dime nearly 8 decades after it was first struck. To collect a 1971 dime is to collect not just a coin but a story, a piece of history minted in an era of change, uncertainty, and resilience. It is a reminder that even the smallest denominations in our coinage carry weight far beyond their size, representing the people who used them, the economy that demanded them, and the nation that issued them. In the vast history of American coinage, few coins capture both the ordinary rhythm of daily life and the extraordinary story of a nation's values as the Roosevelt dime. And when we look at the year 1969, we are not just looking at a small silver-colored piece of metal, but at a historical artifact that connects politics, economy, design, artistry, and the American spirit of resilience. The 1969 dime stands as a symbol of change in the United States, for this was a nation transitioning from the turbulence of the 1960s into the modern economic world, and every single dime minted in this year carries the quiet echoes of that transformation. To truly understand the 1969 dime, we must travel back to the origins of the Roosevelt dime itself. First introduced in 1946, only a year after the passing of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, who guided America through both the Great Depression and World War II, the coin was meant as a permanent tribute to his leadership and, more importantly, to his role in the March of Dimes, a grassroots campaign to fight polio, which had afflicted millions, including Roosevelt himself. It was therefore fitting that his portrait would grace the 10-cent piece forever, linking his memory to the cause of public health and civic duty. The dime's designer was John R. Sinek, chief engraver of the United States Mint, and he created a left-facing portrait of Roosevelt with the inscriptions, "Liberty and in God we trust," accompanied by the date and mint mark on the obverse, while the reverse featured a torch flanked by an olive branch symbolizing peace and an oak branch symbolizing strength with the motto, E pluribus unum. Binding the imagery together, this design, launched in 1946, became instantly recognizable, and it remains in circulation today, which makes the 1969 dime not just a coin but part of an unbroken line of history stretching from the mid-20th century to the present. Now the context of 1969 is crucial, because by this year, the United States had already abandoned silver coinage in most denominations. The Coinage Act of 1965 had removed silver from the dime, and the quarter replacing it with a clad composition of outer layers of copper, nickel bonded to a pure copper core. This change was driven by rising silver prices and the need to keep coins in circulation because people were hoarding the older 90% silver issues. So the 1969 dime is a copper nickel-clad coin with a weight of 27 grams and a diameter of 17.91 millimeters, struck in the same specifications still used today. However, although it may appear common, its story is deeply tied to America's shifting economy, the end of silver coinage, inflationary pressures, and the growing role of coins as symbols rather than intrinsic stores of value. The United States Mint struck the 1969 dime at three major facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia produced coins without a mint mark. Denver used the D mark, and San Francisco struck coins with the S mark, many of which were specially prepared as proof coins for collectors in official proof sets. The Philadelphia mintage exceeded 145 million coins, while Denver produced over 563 million, making it the largest contributor, and San Francisco struck a little more than 9 million proof coins. Each of these mints contributed to a national coinage system designed to keep commerce flowing during a time of rapid social and technological change. What makes the 1969 dime especially intriguing to numismatists is the attention to varieties and errors which often transform an everyday coin into a rare collectible. Although the clad composition meant these coins were not valued for their metal content, certain error coins became highly desirable among collectors'. Examples include off-center strikes, double strikes, misaligned dies, and full band details on the reverse torch, which indicate a strong strike and careful preservation. The proof dimes struck at San Francisco are particularly studied for cameo and deep cameo. Contrast with frosted devices against mirror fields, creating visually stunning examples for advanced collections. But beyond its physical details, the 1969 dime must be seen in its historical setting. The year 1969 was one of both turbulence and triumph for America. The nation watched as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon while simultaneously facing deep divisions over the Vietnam War. Civil rights struggles and cultural upheaval coins from this period represent the spending habits of everyday Americans at the gas station, the grocery store, or the movie theater, and every dime circulated through countless hands, carried with it the weight of the nation's identity. Collectors today study the 1969 dime, not only for its varieties, but also for its place in the timeline of Roosevelt dimes. It belongs to the early clad era when the transition away from silver was still fresh in the public's memory, and many Americans lamented the loss of intrinsic value in their coins. Yet despite the criticisms, the Roosevelt dime endured without a major redesign, proving that the portrait of FDR had become timeless and unassailable. This coin in many ways stabilized the 10-cent denomination and helped solidify the mint's strategy of cost-effective clad coinage. Over the decades, the 1969 dime has also become a teaching tool for students of American history. It tells us about the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt, the ingenuity of coin design, the pressures of monetary policy, and the resilience of a nation that was reshaping its identity for the modern age. While at first glance it may look like a common dime found in pocket change, its story reveals layers of meaning that connect to politics, economics, and even the aspirations of space exploration. In the year it was struck, to hold a 1969 dime today is to hold a fragment of that pivotal year when America was balancing turmoil at home with triumphs abroad. From a numismatic standpoint, the coin is still accessible to collectors, and yet high-grade examples certified by leading grading services can fetch strong prices, especially in mint state with full torch details or in deep cameo-proof condition. These coins bridge the gap between affordability and historical significance, which makes them appealing for beginners and advanced collectors alike. And they remind us that value in coin collecting is not only measured in dollars, but also in the richness of the story each coin tells. Thus, the 1969 dime is more than a piece of currency. It is a miniature monument to Franklin Roosevelt, a reflection of America's economic strategy in the face of changing silver markets, and a silent witness to the sweeping events of 1969, from the lunar landing to the cultural revolutions that reshaped society. For a YouTube channel dedicated to rare American coins, it offers the perfect subject because it allows viewers to explore not just a coin, but an entire era encapsulated in copper nickel. The story of the 1968 Roosevelt dime is not simply the story of a small piece of metal struck by the United States Mint. It is the story of a nation transitioning through a period of immense social change. It is the continuation of a design that symbolized honor to a president who guided America through one of its darkest hours. And it is a reflection of the economic realities and minting innovations of the late 20th century. To understand why the 1968 dime matters, we must first step back to 1946, the year the Roosevelt dime was introduced. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had passed away in April 1945 after leading the country through the Great Depression, and most of World War II, his image was chosen to appear on the dime partly because of his enduring legacy as a wartime leader, and partly because of his personal connection to the March of Dimes, a charitable effort that sought to fight polio, a disease Roosevelt himself struggled with throughout his life. The new dime was both a tribute and a national symbol of perseverance. When we arrive at 1968, more than 2 decades had passed since the first Roosevelt dime entered circulation, but the world in which the coin was struck had changed dramatically. The United States was in the midst of the Vietnam War. Cities across the country were rocked by protests. The civil rights movement was still reshaping society, and a wave of cultural revolution was sweeping through American life. The dime struck in this year reflects that transitional period not only in its design but also in its composition and minting practices. Up until 1964, United States dimes were struck in 90% silver, but due to rising silver prices and a shortage of coins in circulation, the government made the controversial decision to switch to a copper-nickel-clad composition beginning in 1965. The dime was no longer precious metal, but a sandwich of copper and nickel bonded together, which gave it a silvery appearance but stripped it of its intrinsic value. By 1968, the clad Roosevelt dime had already been circulating for 3 years, and the transition was largely accepted by the public. Though collectors mourned the end of silver coinage, the 1968 dime is particularly important because it was the first year that proof coins were once again struck at the San Francisco Mint after a hiatus from 1965 to 1967. During those 3 years, special mint sets replaced proof coinage. But in 1968, the Mint resumed proof production with the S Mint mark proudly stamped on the reverse. This decision marked a revival of traditional numismatic artistry and gave collectors a reason to once again celebrate new issues. The proof 1968 dime in particular holds a special place in coin history, as it represents a turning point in modern minting. Another key development in 1968 was the return of mint marks after a period when mint marks were removed to discourage hoarding collectors. Remember that from 1965 through 1967, no mint marks were used on dimes, nickels, quarters, or half dollars. But beginning in 1968, the Denver Mint and San Francisco Mint resumed placing their identifying letters D and S on coins, while the Philadelphia Mint remained without a mint mark. This makes the 1968 dime historically significant because it was part of the first wave of modern clad coinage to carry mint marks once again, and this detail helps modern numismatists trace its origins. When examining the 1968 dime, we must also consider its design. The obverse features John R. Sinnock's portrait of Franklin Roosevelt, a design first engraved in the mid-1940s with Roosevelt facing left. His profile strong and commanding. Beneath his chin are the inscriptions, "Liberty and in God we trust," and the date, 1968. Along with the designer's initials, JS, the reverse, features the torch of liberty, flanked by an olive branch representing peace, and an oak branch symbolizing strength and independence above it, reads, United States of America, while the motto E pluribus unum reminds us of unity in diversity. The denomination 1 dime appears at the bottom. This design, simple yet powerful, has endured for decades, making the 1968 dime not only a circulating coin, but also an enduring artistic expression of American ideals. In terms of mintage, the 1968 dimes were struck in large numbers at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, with hundreds of millions entering circulation. The San Francisco Mint, however, struck proof coins in much smaller numbers for collectors, and these proof dimes stand out today for their sharp strike mirrored fields and frosted devices. Yet even among these massive mintages, there are rare varieties and errors that bring excitement to collectors. Some 1968 dimes have been discovered with striking issues, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and die varieties, creating a whole field of study within modern numismatics. The proof 1968 S dime in particular is known for the extremely rare no S variety where the mint mark was accidentally omitted. These no S dimes are highly sought after, commanding thousands of dollars at auction and making the 1968 series one of the most valuable modern dimes to search for. The economic backdrop of 1968 also plays into the coin's importance. Inflation was rising. The United States was spending heavily on the Vietnam War, and the value of silver continued to increase in global markets, making the clad composition of coins a practical necessity rather than a temporary solution. Americans were adjusting to a world where their coinage no longer held intrinsic precious metal value. Yet the dime remained a vital part of daily commerce. Vending machines, parking meters, payphones all demanded the 10-cent piece, and so millions of Americans interacted daily with the very coin that collectors now view as historic. From a historical perspective, the 1968 dime captures both continuity and change. It continues the Roosevelt design unbroken since 1946. It continues the copper-nickel clad system first introduced in 1965, but it also marks the return of mint marks. It marks the revival of proof coinage. It introduces rare varieties that would become legendary in numismatic circles, and it exists in a year that was one of the most turbulent in American history. The assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, the protests at the Democratic National Convention, the height of the space race, and the struggles of a society divided all unfolded, while these very dimes were struck, circulated, and carried in the pockets of Americans' collectors. Today prize the 1968 dime, not only for its design but for what it represents. It is a coin that bridges the gap between silver and clad, between old minting traditions and modern techniques, between an America still rooted in the past and one rapidly moving into a new era. To hold a 1968 dime is to hold a piece of that history, a reminder of a nation in transition, and a tribute to Franklin Roosevelt, whose image has endured on the dime longer than any other president has endured on a circulating coin. In the vast and fascinating history of American coinage, few pieces capture the quiet yet enduring significance of everyday money. Like the 1972 Roosevelt dime, a small silver-colored coin that most people have handled countless times without realizing. The depth of history design changes minting challenges and economic contexts that surround it. To understand the true story of the 1972 dime, one must begin with the origins of the Roosevelt dime itself, created in 1946 to honor President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the nation's only four-term president who led America through the Great Depression and the Second World War, and whose image was chosen for the dime not only for his towering leadership, but also because of his direct association with the March of Dimes, a charitable campaign launched to fight polio, the disease Roosevelt himself battled for much of his life. The dime, therefore, became more than just currency. It was a symbol of resilience, unity, and progress in the American story. By the time the 1972 issue rolled off the presses, the United States was in a period of change. The nation had already transitioned away from silver coinage following the Coinage Act of 1965, and the dime was now struck in a copper-nickel clad composition with an inner core of pure copper sandwiched between outer layers of nickel. This change was critical to preserve the nation's silver reserves, which were being depleted by rising demand and hoarding. So when you hold a 1972 dime, you are looking at a coin that represents the new era of modern coinage, no longer tied to precious metal content, but instead reflecting practicality, mass production, and the economic realities of the late 20th century, the coin was struck. At 3 mints, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each had its own story. Philadelphia dimes of 1972 carried no mint mark in keeping with tradition. Denver issues bore the D mark and were produced in massive quantities, while the San Francisco mint focused primarily on proof coins, specially struck for collectors with mirrored fields and frosted designs, which today remain sought after by numismatists who appreciate their artistry beyond mint origins. The 1972 dime also reflects the intricate design work of John R. Sinnock, the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint, who first crafted Roosevelt's portrait in 1946. His initials J.S. appear at the base of Roosevelt's neck, and for decades a baseless rumor spread that those initials secretly represented Joseph Stalin. Such myths, though completely false, highlight how coinage often becomes the subject of cultural and political speculation, while the obverse presents Roosevelt's profile with the words, "Liberty and in God we trust," the reverse displays a torch symbolizing liberty, flanked by an olive branch for peace and an oak branch for strength, a timeless design that continues to this day. But the real history of the 1972 dime is not just in its design, it is in its role within the greater economic landscape of America during the early 70s. Inflation was climbing, wages were shifting, and yet the dime retained its essential place in daily life. Vending machines, payphones, laundromats, and everyday transactions relied on it. Millions of children carried it in their pockets to buy candy or gum, while adults used it for parking meters and countless small purchases, which means that beyond its metallic composition, the 1972 dime represents a tangible artifact of how Americans lived, worked, and moved through the world in that period. Collectors today study the 1972 dime, not for its silver content, but for its minting varieties and error coins, for example, dimes that were struck off-center, or those with doubling errors on the lettering can command significant premiums far above face value. The proof issues, particularly the deep cameo varieties with their sharp contrast between frosted devices and mirrored fields, are especially prized. The condition also matters enormously. Since most dimes circulated heavily and became worn, high-grade uncirculated specimens graded MS-65 and above by professional services like PCGS or NGC can fetch strong prices, and thus the 1972 dime is both common in circulation, yet uncommon in pristine quality. It occupies a fascinating place where the ordinary intersects with the collectible, a reflection of how numismatics transforms small everyday objects into windows of history. To tell the story of this coin is to tell the story of a nation transitioning through post-war prosperity, civil rights struggles, the Vietnam era, and an economy adjusting to modern realities, all while Roosevelt's steady gaze on the dime reminded Americans of resilience, courage, and progress. The coin's journey from the presses of the U.S. Mint into pockets, purses, banks, and collections ties together millions of individual lives across decades. It shows us how a 10-cent piece becomes not merely money, but a historical document preserved in metal for future generations who seek to understand their past. And so the 1972 Roosevelt dime is more than just a small coin. It is a legacy of design, of leadership, of economic change, and of the shared experiences of countless Americans whose hands it passed through, making it a truly rare American coin. Not because it is scarce in number, but because of the rare and enduring story it tells about a country and its people. The 1972 Roosevelt dime is a small coin, but behind its modest size lies an entire world of meaning and history that most people overlook. And to understand its place in numismatic heritage, we must travel back in time, not just to 1972, but decades before, when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was alive, leading the United States through some of the most turbulent and transformative moments in modern history. Roosevelt was elected to the presidency in 1932 at the height of the Great Depression, when millions of Americans were out of work, banks were collapsing, and confidence in the system was at an all-time low, his New Deal policies reshaped government intervention in the economy, providing relief to struggling families, reforming industries, and restoring hope. And for many, Roosevelt became a symbol of resilience. A man who, despite his battle with polio, stood tall as a leader when the country needed one most. And later, during the Second World War, his voice and steady guidance became a rallying point not only for Americans but also for allies. Across the world, when he passed away in 1945, the nation mourned deeply, and the Treasury Department quickly sought to honor him on the dime, not only because of his leadership, but also because of his personal connection to the March of Dimes campaign, which had raised money to fight polio, the very disease he had endured, thus in 1946. The Roosevelt dime was born carrying his profile on the obverse with the strong inscriptions, "Liberty and in God we trust," a coin that merged personal sacrifice with national memory. By the time 1972 arrived, the Roosevelt dime had already been in circulation for more than 25 years. And during that period, American coinage itself had undergone sweeping changes, the most important of which was the Coinage Act of 1965 that eliminated silver from circulating dimes and quarters prior to 1965. These coins contained 90% silver and 10% copper, making them valuable not just as money, but also for their bullion content as silver. Prices rose. The public began hoarding coins, and the mint could not keep up with demand, leading Congress to act and switch the dime to a clad composition beginning in 1965. The dime was now made of an inner copper core, bonded to outer layers of nickel, a sandwich-like structure that gave the coin its silvery appearance, while drastically lowering costs. So when collectors today study a 1972 dime, they are looking at a coin that belongs firmly to this modern clad era, no longer tied to precious metal, but representing efficiency, durability, and mass production suitable for an America that was expanding rapidly, both economically and demographically.